Imagine getting a secret system and a rare healing power, not to save people, but to destroy your body's limits in hellish training and heal yourself in seconds just to go back and mercilessly butcher your enemies. In this video, watch how Zeke Draker returns from death to his childhood as the ultimate loser in a family of dragon slayers to turn the tables on everyone. You'll love watching this outcast use his secret system and forbidden ether power to humiliate Academy geniuses and mercilessly crush his bullies in bone-shattering fights. But the real shock, what will he do when his psychopathic brother, the Butcher Knight, shows up at the blessing ritual, and how will he shock the entire world with his true awakened power?
The story begins amidst the howling winds of a desolate mountain range covered in white snow, destined to be stained with blood soon. A man's voice rang out, overflowing with arrogance, calling his captive a fool and mocking him. "Do you really think you can escape this tight siege? Speak, where is the ancient relic located?" But the captive did not tremble. Rather, he let out a mocking laugh that echoed in the mountains, calling his captors a bunch of fools. Here, the horrific truth is revealed. The man's arms were completely amputated, yet he asked them defiantly, "Do you really think severing my limbs will make me kneel and reveal the secret?" They seethed with anger at his insolence, but one of them maintained a cold calmness, pointing out the need to rein themselves in and contact the main squad first. They took out a magical communication crystal and spoke through it. "We have captured the Ghost of the North, requesting confirmation of coordinates for extraction." One of them shouted in fury, not believing this man is still breathing without arms, wondering about the madness that drives him to compete with the Emperor personally for the same legendary relic, to which his colleague replied that this scoundrel aims only to annoy them after subjecting them to agonies for days. They agreed with a malicious smile to amuse themselves a little by torturing him before backup arrives, as a sort of just revenge for what they suffered because of him in this freezing cold.
And while they were exchanging chatter and threats, the armless man was silently initiating an act that transcends the boundaries of the human mind. They turned to him, telling him gloatingly to prepare, for the torture session is about to begin. One of them took out a coin to decide who would have the honor of torturing him first, and tossed it in the air nonchalantly. And in those fractions of a second, the man bent down and bit with grinding teeth onto one of his severed arms lying on the snow, and with brutal force he reattached it to his bleeding shoulder, declaring with eyes burning with the fire of revenge that he would never allow himself to be a helpless prey. Here his name is revealed. He is Zeke Draker, the first person recorded as a failure in awakening his power in the ancient Draker family. It is told that Zeke was born into the lineage of the great dragon slayers, but with a cursed body incapable of absorbing or using aura, and due to his failure to awaken, he was considered worthless trash and expelled from his family mercilessly. Since that day, he did everything in his power to become stronger and ensure his survival, remembering someone's old words, "If you seek only power, you will ultimately attain nothing but emptiness." Zeke dashed forward, his sword gleaming in the hand that had just regained its life, while the coin was still falling slowly to settle in the other man's hand. And when the coin revealed its result, announcing the head side, the shocking surprise occurred. The head of the coin tosser flew into the air with a fountain of blood exploding from it, while Zeke passed by him with the speed of a true ghost.
Zeke completed his thoughts in a cold voice. "I have always loathed that adage, because it only comes from the mouths of the strong who have never tasted helplessness." Then he turned with anger and eyes radiating pure killing intent towards the remaining other man. He lunged at him with a speed exceeding the eye's ability to track, and with a single crushing blow he cleaved his sword in half and tore his chest vertically, for Zeke to conclude the scene with his own law. The weak are always crushed under the feet of the strong, and what they possess is forcibly taken from them. This is the only truth of this world. Zeke turned slowly towards his blood-stained side, and with a movement not devoid of brutality, he reattached his other arm back to its place amidst the bewilderment of his killers. He muttered coldly, "It seems escaping is no longer an available option." In return, the men screamed in panic tinged with anger at this disgusting and unnatural sight of limbs reattaching, echoing, "He is a monster, but by cutting off his head he will surely die." But Zeke, without an ounce of fear of death, dashed like a raging storm towards the group to begin the final dance. The enemies rushed in a desperate attempt to contain this incarnate demon, and proceeded to surround him using a deadly and tight sword formation that leaves no loophole for survival. And as the dust of battle cleared, a terrifying scene manifested. Zeke had managed to annihilate them all and turn them into lifeless corpses. But this victory cost him his soul, for his back was left torn, impaled with dozens of swords that pierced entirely through his body.
He fell to his knees and began coughing blood profusely, whispering in a dying voice, "It seems this is the end. I will die soon." And despite his sorrow over his uncompleted revenge, he smiled bitterly, considering stealing the great relic the Emperor was panting after is a victory in itself.
He opened his trembling palm to stare at the ancient relic, a small, masterfully carved dragon statue inside a mysterious jewel pulsating with hidden magic. He yielded to his inevitable fate and closed his eyes, bidding life farewell, whispering a final apology. "I am sorry, Alicia." And in that defining moment, a hot drop of blood fell from his nose to touch the statue's surface, causing the jewel to explode, releasing a bright golden aura. A transparent system window suddenly appeared before him, bearing a glowing text. "Your invincible will is capable of awakening the ancient power." It added, "The soul of an eternal dragon will be implanted in the will of those who persevere." Then a mysterious cloaked figure materialized from the light, embracing him tenderly and asking, "Do you agree to the contract?" As he drew his final breaths, Zeke wondered in bitter sarcasm about the cause of his hallucinations and hearing strange voices while dying. But the voice continued to urge, repeating its eternal question that pierces the mind. Zeke spat blood and shouted in exhausted anger, "I will agree. Just shut up and let me die in peace." The status window flashed again with a new decisive notification. The awakening agreement has been successfully confirmed, and announced that an inevitable, irreversible power is being activated, starting a countdown whose echo resounds in the void. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And when the countdown ended and a white flash swallowed him, Zeke's voice echoed, but in the tone of a younger man, saying, "This is exactly what happened." He regained consciousness to find himself standing in front of a mirror, safe and sound, realizing the massive shock. He had regressed in time to the past. He stared at his reflection, muttering in disbelief, "This is impossible." For despite his restored youth, the ghost of the pain was still alive in his memory, and he could feel the blades of the swords piercing his back with terrifying clarity. Zeke felt a strange familiarity sneaking into his senses toward this place, only to remember in a fleeting flash that he is in the cradle. It is the strict training facility belonging to the Draker family, the place where human blades are ruthlessly honed to become lethal weapons. Here, the lineage of dragon slayers is raised, one of the three great families that grasp the reins of absolute power in this world. The pillars of this glory were laid by Zeke Draker, the continent's legendary hero who cleaved the chest of the tyrant dragon Bahamut in a grinding war a millennium ago. Perhaps the boiling blood of the dragon hunters in their veins is what granted every member of this family the destructive blessing of the aura. This blood makes their awakening as elite knights an inevitability, except for only one outcast who failed to prove his worth, Zeke. Suddenly, a transparent blue system window floated into his line of sight again, silently announcing the start of the management system reboot process. Zeke jolted from his bed abruptly, his eyes widening in intense anticipation of what surprises beyond the boundaries of time this screen would bring.
The screen continued broadcasting its automated report, confirming the documentation of the awakened soul and beginning the immediate preparation of the body for integration. Following his miraculous assimilation of the will of the great dragon before his death, he was granted an exceptional clearance to access a portion of this hidden system's privileges. The window welcomed its host with digital coldness, announcing the activation of the attributes panel as successive screens suddenly popped up surrounding Zeke from every side. The scene perfectly matched old magical video games, leading him to wonder deep within, is that cursed artifact the architect of this madness? The screen showed he currently resides in a low rank, but identified his class as a healer, an extremely rare and dangerous specialization, highlighting a locked draconic skill requiring 10 points to unlock. Zeke ran his hand in amazement across the glowing virtual interface, muttering in bewilderment. It's tangible and responsive, just like digital myths. He could flip through its multiple menus and control the attributes with the same fluid mechanism he knew. As he approached to precisely examine the glowing lines, a deep question crossed his mind regarding the nature of the mysterious class skill written before him. What increased his confusion was that it was not written in the language of humans, but engraved in the extinct dragon alphabet forgotten for ages. He recalled in his memory the lessons of his old teacher. In bygone eras, humans were divided into classes according to their talents, and each class hones exclusive techniques called skills. As a healer, he was now theoretically capable of activating healing magic. Zeke whispered to himself bitterly, remembering his past life. After my late awakening, I underwent hellish training that brought me to the brink of death time and again.
But whatever the case with this strange system, its confirmation of him possessing the healer class pushed him to dispel all doubts and test this power immediately. The moment he thought of it, a blindingly bright and pure light suddenly glowed in his palm. He was shocked by the speed of the response. He remembered that his beginning as a healer in his past life was only achieved with great difficulty when he reached his 20s. Specifically, it only happened after his suffering to unlock his magical ether hall at a late age. Zeke closed his eyes, drowning in absolute focus to examine his interior, while a mysterious purple mist began to encircle his body like a spiritual shield. Then he opened his eyes slowly, gleaming with the sparkle of certainty. He was assured that his genius intuition had not failed him.
His ether hall was already activated to its full capacity, making him realize the terrifying truth. Despite losing his old body honed by training, he had regressed in time, carrying with him his entire arsenal of magical skills and his complete collection of combat memories. This put him at a mighty starting point, light years ahead of his weak and outcast version in this timeline. To capitalize on this overwhelming advantage, he knew he must inventory his current abilities and know every detail resting under the command of his new system. However, his racing train of thoughts was interrupted by a strong and sudden knock on the door, followed by a hoarse voice asking for permission to enter. Zeke jolted in his place, puzzled about how to hide the glowing system interface, whose secrets he hadn't finished reading yet, before he was exposed. The man stormed into the room with heavy steps, expressing his astonishment mixed with denunciation at Zeke's lack of preparation to leave up to this moment.
He asked sharply what was occupying his master's mind. It was immediately clear that this knocker was none other than his personal servant. Zeke wondered in surprise about the reason for getting ready, before suddenly realizing that the servant could not see the floating system screens, letting out a sigh of relief deep down. But Decker released a heavy, majestic aura that pressed on the air in the room, condemning his master's forgetfulness and doubting his seriousness regarding the fateful destination awaiting them. Zeke's memory flashed back like a strong slap to his bitter childhood days, when he would tremble in terror and helplessness before this servant's frightening looks. Although his mind now carried the maturity and cruelty of a man who faced death at 32, his young body automatically responded to a dread deeply etched in his cells. Suddenly, the system screen flashed, announcing the activation of an automatic skill called Balanced Mind. The clouds of tension dissipated, his pulse slowed, and his thoughts cleared in the blink of an eye like the surface of an icy lake. Zeke breathed perfectly calmly, realizing that his tension had completely dissipated, for the Balanced Mind skill does exactly what its name suggests, clearing the mind. While he was enjoying the comfort of this automatic activation, Decker strictly interrupted his thoughts, asking whether he was listening to him and repeatedly reminding him that this event is of extreme importance. At that moment, terrifying and dark memories from his distant past flashed in Zeke's mind, an image of crimson blood staining a cold stone floor. It is his own blood. This bloody nightmare was interrupted by Decker's words, who was stressing the importance of the savage assessment test known as the pancration. Zeke explained deep down that all the children of the Draker family are thrown into a brutal training system called the Cradle, which starts at the age of 7 and continues for 5 years of hell in strict training.
Every year, the instructors assess these new students through bloody dueling and combat competitions inside the Pancratium arena, without any rules, where the instructor selects the opponents himself. But on special occasions, students are allowed to choose their opponents if both parties agree, and since it is a ruleless combat, some are carried out with severe injuries, or worse, some never make it out alive. Because this savage arena is the sole measure that determines a student's rank and class within the academy, these children had no choice but to crush one another and fight with every atom of their being. Their strict instructor's voice echoed across the arena, announcing, "As you know very well, today is the day of the Pancratium, and you are all supposed to realize that this is the final stage of your assessment." The students roared in unison, "Yes, sir," their morale touching the sky. The head instructor, named Pan Mark, stepped forward with confident steps to coldly announce, "Since you are completely ready, we will begin the massacre immediately." The students cheered enthusiastically again, but soon some sideways, contemptuous glances diverted to settle on Zeke. They whispered with biting sarcasm, "He's here again, despite the crushing humiliation he swallowed last year. If I were in his place, I would have run far away. How can this scum belong to the direct lineage?" In silence, Zeke heard every letter coming out of their mouths. Instructor Mark ignored the murmurs and called out in a booming voice for 2 students named Aaron and Jotai to step up to the ring. The 2 prepared and stood face to face like ferocious beasts, while the instructor raised his hand high in the air. Then he brought it down with a decisive motion, announcing the start of the bloody combat. One of the students seized the initiative immediately and dashed with a reckless attack, directing a heavy direct punch towards his opponent's face. But the opponent smiled maliciously and cunningly, dodged the attack masterfully, and replied with a lightning-fast and lethal kick that settled directly under the attacker's chin. Zeke watched the scene with boredom and yawned as he muttered, "The fight has already ended. This is what happens when you dash like a fool without taking a proper defensive stance." The opponent fell to the ground to announce Aaron's sweeping victory. Zeke remembered how he used to tremble in terror at these scenes in his childhood, but now, with the mind of a man battle-hardened by wars, these are nothing but insects to him. On the other side of the stands, another student's eyes caught the sight of Zeke's provocative yawn. He started laughing sadistically, cracking his knuckles in preparation to crush Bones. Finally, the awaited moment arrived. Mark called out the name of Zeke and his opponent, Leon, and asked them if they were ready. Leon was the very same person who had been glaring at him with looks of hostility and warning. Zeke realized that his inevitable opponent is Leon, who mocked him openly, saying, "I can't believe you returned to stand before me again. It seems you didn't get your fair share of humiliation last year."
Zeke coldly replied with icy detachment that he doesn't care much for his chatter. Battling memories of the last pancratium began to sneak into his mind, when we saw him in the past lying on the ground bleeding heavily after Leon had given him a severe and merciless beating. Zeke was certain that Leon was manipulating things behind the scenes to ensure his selection as his opponent every year, but he never complained, for their savage family believes that overcoming dirty tricks is the fundamental condition to become a true dragon slayer. But he couldn't help wondering bitterly, why must I share blood with someone this bad and dirty? He remembered that in his previous life, the 4 siblings of the direct lineage never had a real chance to meet or bond. Instead, there were over a dozen lowly cousins who always stood ready to bully and humiliate him. Leon interrupted his thoughts, continuing his provocation. You must admit your stupid courage for standing here before me, especially after what happened to you last time in terms of being shattered. Or perhaps you didn't learn your lesson because you are simply too stupid. At that moment, the balanced mind skill glowed in Zeke's consciousness, erasing all anger from his heart to reply in a calm and terrifying tone. It has been a long time since I was forced to listen to childish insults like these, but I will never be nice if you dare and call me that again. Leon placed his hand on his head condescendingly and mockingly asked what a nobody like him could possibly do. But before he could finish his sentence, Zeke sent him flying through the air with a lightning-fast punch that the eyes couldn't track. Zeke had activated a terrifying skill called Knockout Blow. It is a high-risk skill, warning its user that failing to hit the target will result in the deadly force recoiling back upon them. Leon fell to the ground and began to scream in pain, clutching his face which had received the brutal shock. Zeke looked coldly at his hand, which was enveloped in a radiant ether aura, muttering that he only intended to knock him unconscious, but the skill had activated with an automaticity. Instructor Mark immediately shouted in disapproval of what he was doing, reprimanding him for attacking before the starting signal was announced. Zeke sighed with boredom and smiled slyly, saying, "And who's going to wait for a starting signal on a real battlefield? Whoever strikes first seizes the advantage."
Cold sweat began to pour profusely from Mark's forehead, wondering in terror at the nature of the pure bloodlust emanating from this boy. Leon stood up defiantly to tell the instructor that he was fine, but Mark did not believe his claim, for blood was clearly bleeding from his shattered face. Despite that, Leon arrogantly insisted on continuing, vowing that he would teach this garbage a lesson so he would know his true place. Zeke glanced at him with disdain, thinking that Leon is the true fool who refuses to grasp the lesson. Mark ordered the 2 students to prepare again, then raised his hand and brought it down forcefully to announce the official start of the fight. Leon dashed forward like a raging bull towards his opponent, and he began to receive Zeke's successive attacks in silence and with steadfastness, explaining to himself that he was terrified at first because of the sudden first punch, but he realized now that these normal punches do not hurt him, and that if he maintains the solidity of his defense, this outcast will not pose any threat. However, his mind was reminding him of the need for extreme caution against any counterattack that might surprise him from the left hand, and when Zeke tried to advance to launch a new attack, Leon bent flexibly below the level of the strike and firmly tightened his grip on his opponent's inner knee. He encircled his back triumphantly as he whispered, "That was too predictable," trying to take him down to the ground in a swift movement, adding with vanity that he would teach him a lesson in martial arts. But in a fraction of a second, Leon received a devastating counterstrike that shook his very being. Mark stood dumbfounded, wondering in shock at what his eyes had just captured. Leon's body was shaking violently, affected by the force of the shock.
Although Zeke was the one who was thrown to the ground after the scuffle, Leon looked at him in bewilderment and whispered in a faint voice, "This cannot be right." Zeke's combat intelligence was terrifying, for when everyone, including Mark, thought the takedown attempt would settle the bout in Leon's favor, Zeke focused his energy in a fraction of a second and directed a crushing knee strike directly towards Leon's chin, shattering his grip and breaking free from the takedown. Leon was mistaken when he thought falling meant his opponent's defeat, for Zeke maintaining his deadly calm in the darkest moments was something beyond imagination. Leon began to stagger and felt a pain tearing through his stomach, wondering helplessly about the cause of his paralysis and inability to respond. He ordered himself to retreat to create a safe distance, but before he could take a step back, a harsh kick from Zeke surprised him, settling in his thigh, which made him lose his balance and caused him to stagger on the verge of falling. Nevertheless, Leon showed stubbornness and regained his balance with difficulty by firmly planting his foot on the arena floor. Then he lunged, directing a desperate punch towards Zeke, who, in return, was smiling with overwhelming happiness at discovering his absolute ability to control his power. At that moment, Zeke activated a new skill called Enhanced Senses, making the movement of the world around him slow down as if he was seeing everything in slow motion. When Leon's slow punch approached, Zeke dodged it with complete fluidity, drowning in a familiar and delicious feeling from his past life. He had now become the absolute master of ether power, and this manifested visually as if Zeke was weaving invisible magical threads that wrapped around Leon's arm and paralyzed it.
By exploiting the momentum of his opponent's rush, Zeke tightened his control in a fraction of a second, and lifted Leon to hurl him with brute force towards the ground, completely shattering the stone arena floor under the weight of the collision. Mark and the rest of the students froze in their places, a state of absolute bewilderment muzzling their tongues, unable to believe that this predatory beast is the same outcast boy they used to mock. Zeke did not stop at that, but continued his attack using another lethal skill known as precise thrust. He brought his elbow down like a hammer towards Leon's outstretched chest, letting the sound of his ribcage bones shattering be heard with terrifying clarity. Then Zeke stood with majesty and raised his hand saturated with a deadly aura over the shattered body, saying coldly, "Even fools sometimes need someone to teach them a lesson." While Leon tried with a faint and failing voice to plead with the word stop, he found from Zeke nothing but a heart of stone, for he did not respond to his pleas, but rather he continued to pour out his wrath with successive strikes, time and again onto his opponent's shattered face. And he did not stop until he stood upright, his hands stained a dark crimson with Leon's blood. Zeke directed his sharp gaze at everyone and announced coldly, "This is the price of messing with me," adding with bitter irony that his headache had vanished now after breaking a bit of a sweat from the fight. He began to scan the crowd, as if reading the souls of the present and identifying the faces that had despised his past. Then, with utter arrogance, he invited anyone who possessed an ounce of courage or an objection to come down to him into the heart of hell, to the ring. Here, a provocative laugh rose from one of the students, who announced his acceptance of the challenge, asserting that he had much to say to Zeke with his hands. Zeke was not late in identifying the owner of the voice. It was Jakan Verdick, one of his cousins, who spared no effort in humiliating him. Zeke agreed with imperable coldness, but added dismissively, "Fighting you alone would be boring," then pointed toward Jakan's servant, Liam, inviting him to join the massacre. Jakan seethed with anger at Zeke's insult, which made him insufficient as an opponent on his own, and asked him with a hateful tone if he truly meant him. Zeke's response came as mocking as a slap. "Of course, you fool. Do you see anyone else?" At that moment, the blood boiled in Jakan's veins, and he lost every ounce of his sanity. He and Liam stormed the ring like a hurricane, while Instructor Mark shouted warning Zeke against starting before hearing the starting whistle. Zeke was smiling with a mysterious smile, thinking that fate had given him an exciting opportunity to meet Liam again at this age. This silent boy, Liam, would be known in the future by a terrifying title that shakes the continent, the King of Mercenaries. He started as a simple servant to Jakan, but his innate talent later pushed him to carve his way inside the training center in the academy. Despite being a distant relative who did not receive a noble's education, he stormed the walls of Valhalla High Academy through his prowess alone. His journey did not stop there. Rather, he joined the armies of small countries before his star shone as the most famous mercenary known to the era. Liam established his own empire of hired blades, that group which through its strength was able to unite the three largest mercenary blocks under one banner. From there, his name was engraved in history as the invincible King of Mercenaries. As soon as Mark announced the start of the bout, Jakan launched a surprise attack, charged with all his strength to settle the matter immediately. But Zeke stunned him with his cold reaction. He caught his fist in midair and told him calmly, "Didn't I ask you a minute ago to attack me together?" Jakan screamed in an attempt to break free, wondering if Zeke thought his cheap tricks would work on him. With a sudden movement, Zeke directed a lightning kick from above toward his opponent's legs. Jakan's balance collapsed due to the searing pain that swept through his legs, forcing him to move away while staggering. Zeke watched his opponent as he blocked the strike with his arm coldly and commented mockingly, "You should have paid attention to your footwork before thinking about kicking." Jakan could not hide his bewilderment as he looked at his leg that had failed him. In that moment of distraction, Zeke dashed like an arrow, saying, "I can't believe you are looking away from your opponent again during the fight. What an amateur." Zeke enveloped his fist in a glowing ether aura, preparing for a decisive blow. Jakan raised his hands in a desperate and panicked defense to protect his face. Zeke mocked him with a harsh look. "You look so terrified. Where did your courage go?" Instead of striking his face, Zeke directed a treacherous low kick that targeted the exact spot of his old injury with pinpoint accuracy, commenting, "You didn't even expect this trick? This is why I asked you to attack together, for you alone do not pose a challenge." Immediately after the kick, and before Jakan could process the shock, Zeke returned to deliver a resounding punch to his body. The blow caused severe internal bleeding, making Jakan stagger and fall slowly toward the ground. Zeke leaned over him and whispered coldly, "This is not enough to atone for your sins." Jakan screamed while writhing in pain on the ground, calling Liam desperately to do his duty and fight. On the other side of the arena, Liam stood with majestic silence watching the humiliating fall of his master. Liam began slowly taking his hands out of his pockets in a movement that announced the entry of the real beast into the arena. Zeke wondered to himself in amazement, how can a 12-year-old child possess such a mighty physical build? Zeke immediately realized that the biggest problem lay in the reach of Liam's long arms. If he allowed him to take the initiative, he wouldn't find a gap to reach him. And when Liam began preparing his fist for the attack, Zeke exploded, dashing toward him without hesitation. Using his aura to raise his speed to its maximum limits, he began pouring a barrage of rapid punches.
He was screaming in his mind, "I must seize the initiative now, or he will crush me." The two began a rapid death dance, moving around the arena like overlapping shadows. Zeke used the advanced severing technique, which launches lightning-fast successive attacks aimed at blinding the enemy and paralyzing their movement. The other students froze in their places, unable to believe that this level of fighting was coming from an outcast child. Even Instructor Mark could not hide his surprise, muttering that this performance was unprecedented. He noticed with his intelligence that Zeke was using the fierce northern combat technique. That technique which is foreign to the central region that sanctifies the sword, making him wonder in amazement, where did this boy get this forbidden knowledge? In the meantime, Zeke was struggling with pains tearing through his weak body, amazed at how quickly his energy was depleting and how exhausted he was from just exchanging blows. But Liam's monstrous build was a nightmare. He neither dodges nor defends, but absorbs all blows with his body as solid as a rock, which reminded Zeke of the merciless ferocity of the king of mercenaries. Zeke's hand began to bleed from the intensity of the impact with Liam's body, and he realized that his young body was drawing its final breaths, but he decided to end the matter immediately after analyzing the gaps in Liam's defense. Zeke began charging ether into his fist for a final crushing attack. While Liam watched his opponent's movements with extreme caution, Zeke lunged forward with a punch charged with immense power to the point that it generated a visible shockwave in the air. But before it touched his face, Liam dodged it with terrifying ease, accurately tracking his trajectory to push Zeke's hand aside. Zeke felt a fleeting astonishment, thinking that Liam shouldn't be able to see the aura with his naked eyes, concluding that these monsters possess an unnatural sixth sense. Liam exploited Zeke's momentum and tightened his steel grip on Zeke's arm and waist, and when he proceeded to lift him to hurl him to the ground with a finishing move, a sudden sharp pain pierced the back of his massive head, for Zeke had exploited the angle of the fall to direct a lightning-fast kick that landed directly on the back of his opponent's skull. Immediately after that, Zeke tightened his grip on Liam's staggering arm, and with his increasing sensing of the ether, he began executing a complex and lethal choking move. But due to the vast size difference, Liam remained standing like a mountain. Liam began coughing violently, trying to catch his breath with difficulty, while Zeke whispered coldly in his ear, "No matter how great your brute strength is, it won't do you any good if oxygen is cut off from your brain." Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced Zeke's body, causing him to vomit blood following consecutive harsh punches Liam directed to his exposed side. Zeke smiled amidst his blood, saying that if Liam wanted to resist until the end, then he was completely ready for it, and their eyes met in a look overflowing with determination and ferocity. Zeke tightened his grip around Liam's neck, choking him mercilessly, while Liam continued delivering devastating punches to Zeke's ribs time and again in a bloody struggle for survival. The students were terrified by the bloodiness of this fight, while one female student stood observing the scene with a terrifying smile of enjoyment. Even Instructor Mark froze in his place, unable to avert his gaze from this savage clash. Finally, Liam's swollen hand relaxed, sending him falling to the ground, bringing Zeke down with him. Silence prevailed. Liam was completely unconscious, and Zeke was bleeding profusely from his side as a result of the crushing blows he had received. The amused student spoke arrogantly, indicating that she expected this insane level from him, and added that eliminating him would be enjoyable, but she was certain that it was impossible for the Academy to allow him to fight again after displaying this brutality. Shortly after in his room, the servant Decker's voice broke the silence, saying he heard about Zeke's injury, asking if he was okay. Zeke answered briefly that he was fine, but Decker politely and insistently asked to check his pulse to make sure himself. Zeke immediately realized that Decker didn't care about his health, but wanted to check his pulse to find out if he had awakened his aura. So he sighed with boredom and asked that he wait. He extended his hand coldly for Decker to thank him and begin the examination. And at that moment, Zeke sensed a deep blue aura, flowing regularly and coldly through the servant's veins. Zeke was struck by a deep muffled shock beneath his calm mask, and wondered to himself whether Decker was a blue knight, while the latter was engrossed in his examination. Zeke explained in his mind that when examining an awakened person, focus is solely on the energy points, but Decker was scrutinizing carefully and controlling his aura with a surgeon's precision, which proved with certainty that he is a blue knight. He added that knights are ranked based on their combat prowess and their control over the aura. The white swordsman is the beginner level and includes mostly children before they receive the blessing. The yellow swordsman is the one who has awakened his aura and opened the energy points, which is what all cradle trainees reach after the blessing. And when a person controls the aura freely, they are granted the title of knight, followed by the purple knight, which is a level that allows the fighter to infuse his sword with aura. As for the blue knight, he's the monster who can form a sharp blade from pure aura. And the level that transcends human limits is what the king of mercenaries Liam reached, and Zeke himself before regressing in time, and is known as the red knight. And there is the legend, the Black Knight, but they are a rare few across the entire continent. Zeke wondered in bewilderment how could someone possessing enough skill to be a military commander accept the role of a personal babysitter. But he decided that this didn't matter now, for no matter how powerful Decker gets, he will never be able to discover his ether energy, for it is a unique and secret power that only 2 people in the entire world can use.
Decker slowly released Zeke's hand and stared into his eyes, asking suspiciously if he was hiding something from him. Zeke replied with a cold smile and a similar question, which caused shock to Decker, who did not expect this psychological game and role reversal of his master. Zeke laughed lightly, claiming he was joking, but Decker's looks kept questioning the secret of this sudden and radical change in his master's personality. Zeke told him in a firm tone that his question was fundamentally wrong. You should ask why did Zeke change only now, and added with a veiled threat that many things will change, and everything will return to its natural order. And he ended his speech with a decisive command. All you have to do now is to follow me in silence. Decker yielded to the reality of the situation and informed him that he had repaired and prepared the training room he requested. Zeke thanked him sincerely, noting that he likes him because he is fast and efficient in executing orders. Then he asked him to leave to get some rest. Zeke thought to himself that the spy tasked with watching him should remain close so he could exploit him and extract information from him. He wondered who issued the order for Decker to watch him, completely ruling out his mother, assuming that one of his snake brothers is behind it. When he entered the training room, his eyes widened at the marvel of its size, expressing his silent admiration for the obscene wealth of the family's estates. He opened the virtual system interface to check the development of his skills and noticed that the severing skill had upgraded to an advanced level, and he wondered with scientific curiosity whether this rapid development was a result of its frequent use in combat. He concluded that skills are activated and developed based on his physical actions, wondering if this meant he possessed them as muscle memories and whether the system would add anything he knew learns as an official skill. He also paused at the mystery of the difference between normal skills and class skills, as the mechanism for activating them seemed very similar to him. His gaze stopped at the encrypted draconic skill, and he felt suspicious towards it, as he didn't initially understand what was meant by the points required to unlock it. He decided to click on the karma points icon, only to discover bloody conditions. They can only be earned by slaughtering monsters.
He remembered that the dungeons are teeming with monsters, but the laws dictate that a fighter must be at least a purple knight to be allowed to enter them. Despite these challenges, his curiosity was burning to know the real reason behind his time regression and the nature of this parasitic system. He pondered the hidden link between skills, classes, and ancient relics, but the picture was still incomplete. He decided to shake these complex thoughts from his head and focus on what he truly excels at, improving his brute strength with the sword and the system, no matter the price he will pay. Zeke explained in his mental notes that this world is ruled by two main powers, the knight's aura, which is honed in the bloody dungeons, and the mage's mana, which is managed and shaped through complex magic circles. And these two powers are as contradictory as water and fire. Therefore, it's impossible for someone who has awakened their aura to acquire mana, and vice versa. But he considered himself lucky, for because of his inability to awaken energy points or circles, his family abandoned him, which allowed him during his period of wandering and exile to meet his greatest teacher, who taught him secrets beyond description. And the greatest legacy he received was the healing ability and the ether hall that his teacher invented, which enabled him to manipulate pure nature energy, making them the only two ether users in the entire world. The scene shifted to see him tearing the air with his sword, exerting every drop of sweat in brutal training. And after a few hours of strenuous effort, his hands were bleeding profusely, and he was panting, saying he felt like he was on the verge of total collapse, convincing himself that it was acceptable to stop here to get some rest.
But suddenly, the system screen flashed, announcing the automatic activation of the healing skill, followed by another skill called stamina recovery, for his entire body to begin repairing itself at an unimaginable speed, getting rid of all the fatigue and muscle tearing resulting from the training he had just gone through to stand again as a tireless fighting machine. Zeke explained to himself that the healing skill is extremely rare, to the point that he didn't even know it existed until he met his teacher in his past life, and had he dared to use it openly before the eyes of others, they would have considered him a monster or an anomalous creature, and for this specific reason, he restrained himself and didn't use it to bind his wounds during his brutal battle against Liam. He had to swallow his pain and rush to activate it to heal himself the moment he was alone within the walls of his room. And now, after his cells have been completely regenerated, he will resume training immediately. He has realized the terrifying secret and the absolute advantage of this skill: training to the brink of death, complete healing, then endless repetition to break the body's limits. The threads of darkness began weaving their cloak over the place, announcing the end of the day. Zeke sighed with a touch of exhaustion and said, "It is time for dinner." But he paused for a moment, wondering with concern about what excuses he could invent for Decker, for he had left the walls and floor of the training area completely shattered and bearing the marks of his brute strength's destruction. After a whole week had passed, and inside the noisy training center cafeteria, tongues were chewing on Zeke's name and how his condition had radically changed, to the point that some whispered in terror, suggesting he might have sold his soul and learned black magic. While other students smiled gloatingly, hoping this outcast would continue shattering the pride of those arrogant people and putting them in their proper place. And in the isolated VIP room inside the cafeteria, there was a luxurious feast spread across the table. One person was quietly enjoying cutting and eating a rich steak, while the rest settled for less lavish meals. That girl was Rena Tehran, Zeke's cousin, the very girl who watched his battle with Liam with predatory and amused looks. A student named Owen spoke with provocative coldness towards the rest. Perhaps you have lost your appetites, but I advise you to eat. You will need every drop of energy for the upcoming sword duel. Owen directed his venomous talk towards Leon, who glared at him angrily and asked if he was intentionally provoking him after his humiliating defeat. Leon lost his mind and stood up angrily to slam his fist hard on the table. That reckless strike caused the table to shake, making Rena's steak fall to the floor. Rena raised her eyes slowly and shot a frost-cold glare at him because he dared to interrupt her meal. Cold sweat began to pour from Leon in terror and tension from that terrifying girl's aura. And in the corner of the room, the shattered Jackin also appeared, asking in a voice filled with malice about the next plan to deal with Zeke. Owen analyzed the situation, saying his hand-to-hand combat was fierce and impressive, but Zeke will be miserable when it comes to sword dueling. And he wondered mockingly, what could he possibly do if he barely possesses the muscles to carry his normal sword?
Leon intervened, trying to flatter and save face, claiming he was forced to get a custom sword beforehand because the other swords were too heavy and hindered his movement, and added emotionally, "It is not logical for me to lose to someone beneath me. You all saw it. Zeke only won by a cowardly stroke of luck." Rena's features seemed heavily annoyed by his stupidity and his pathetic attempt to convince himself that Zeke's superiority was a mere coincidence. Leon didn't even dare to raise his head to look into her piercing eyes. Rena said in a decisive, indisputable tone, "If you truly believe this lie of yours, then you do not even deserve to bear the title of knight in the Draker family." Then she turned and left the table with confident steps, leaving them in a humiliating silence. Zeke explained to himself that sword dueling, unlike the hand-to-hand pancratium combat, uses real sharp swords, which is the main reason behind most fatal injuries inside the cradle and the true arena that exposes the vast differences between the students' skills. And 1 month after these final exams, the blessing ceremony will begin, the great event where the members of the lineage awaken to their own Panem aura. Later, in the open sandy dueling arena, Instructor Mark ordered Zeke to step forward to the ring. Zeke stepped forward carrying an exaggeratedly massive sword on his shoulder, so everyone burst into laughter, mockingly wondering why he was carrying a comically sized weapon that doesn't fit his build, and they sarcastically accused him of only trying to pretend he is stronger and bigger than he actually is in reality to intimidate his opponents. Suddenly, Rena's sharp feminine voice cut through the wave of mockery as she called his name, and when he raised his head, he saw her walking with steady and majestic steps across the other side of the platform until they met face to face right in the middle of the ring with the wind caressing their swords. She stared directly into his eyes and said with pure defiance, "I have chosen you specifically to be my opponent today." Zeke replied with a confident smile, "It is truly an excellent choice, and I am extremely happy to accept this challenge face to face." Rena stared into his eyes and said, "I noticed how you lift that massive claymore sword with such terrifying ease, and now standing before you, I can see clearly you are absolutely not the Zeke I knew. That weak outcast who used to tremble to carry a normal sword no longer exists." She wondered to herself if this radical change was merely a physical growth spurt, but the heavy and frightening aura emanating from him belied the assumption. But she mentally slapped her cheeks to snap out of her awe, for it was impossible to allow herself to fear and hesitate before the bout she had arrogantly requested even began. Zeke said calmly, "I will do my best as usual, but I must admit, standing before the Lightning Knight is truly nerve-wracking." Zeke explained deep down that Rena, who will later be known by the title Lightning Knight, will be one of the legends of the bloody Continental Wars and immortalized as one of the greatest knights of her coming era. That genius who secretly awakened her aura years before undergoing the blessing ceremony, and despite that, she refrained from using it in the academy under a terrifying pretext. "I want to hone my fundamentals first." Instructor Mark interrupted the charged silence, ordering them to prepare, then lowered his hand, announcing the start of the awaited bout. Rena dashed like a bolt of lightning with a direct piercing attack akin to a spear thrust, but Zeke masterfully parried it, so she did nothing but retreat with amazing fluidity towards the outer side to swoop in again from a blind angle. And now, having snatched the tactical advantage, she launched her sweeping attack once more. But Zeke this time found no room to dodge, so he was forced to use the mass of his massive sword as a shield to block the direct hit. The immense force of the collision knocked him away like a rag doll across the arena's sand, but Zeke planted his feet into the ground and leaned forward to absorb the shock and stabilize himself before falling. He noticed that the distance between them had widened dangerously and realized with a hidden smile that Rena's skill far exceeded his expectations. Nevertheless, his eyes continued to burn with absolute confidence in his ability to tame this storm. Rena advanced to launch the second wave of attack, while the stands ignited with the shouts of the students.
They started demanding him to stop fooling around and die with honor, while Jaqen shouted with malice, asking if Zeke truly thought Reyna was going easy on him. But now, after deciphering her style in seconds, Zeke went back to blocking her series of deadly attacks with icy calmness. Reyna said to herself in frustration, "Despite the narrowness of the gaps I create, I feel as if he is reading my steps before I even take them." And regardless of the mythical speed with which she increased the tempo of her attack, Zeke's broad blade would always be waiting for her to meet her sword at the exact same point with terrifying precision. It seemed insulting, as if he was coldly applauding every desperate attempt she made.
And in deliberate moments, he would leave a small gap in his defense, as if he was actually training her in the heart of a real battle. Like an expert teacher guiding her student to improve the dueling fundamentals she takes pride in. The two blades clashed again with a force that generated fiery sparks, illuminating their faces. This time, Reyna realized the trap, so she decided to break the clash and jump away from him. She stood panting heavily, her chest rising and falling, having been overcome by physical and psychological exhaustion before this human wall. Zeke sighed silently, thinking, "So, this is the primitive style the Lightning Knight fought with while still in the cradle stage. Her sword is straight and honest, but too predictable from someone obsessed with fundamentals to the point of petrification. This obsession is her shell that hinders her genius, and I will take it upon myself to break this shell today." Suddenly, Zeke took a low and terrifying combat stance, leaving Reyna to wonder with a pounding heart what he plans to do with this massive sword. Reyna thought to herself that by taking this low stance, his only option was to close the distance between them with a direct dash, but his explosive speed was beyond the mind's ability to comprehend, for in the fractions of a second she was preoccupied with thinking, he had folded the distance and approached her entirely, like a ghost. He surprised her with a crushing blow from above with his massive sword, forcing her to jump away to dodge the deadly blade. She reassured herself that as long as she succeeded in maintaining a safe distance between them, she would always be able to respond to his wide movements. But in a crazy move, Zeke planted the tip of his sword into the ground and began digging the arena's sand with brute force. This strange behavior pushed Reyna to take an additional step back cautiously. However, all her movements were merely pawns, moving according to his cunning plan. This digging led to the release of a dense cloud of debris and sand, flying like projectiles to hit her face and eyes directly, which made her lose her vision and completely confused her movement. And when she blinked, trying to regain her vision and look forward again, the blood froze in her veins, for he was there, having completely closed the distance and blocking the horizon before her. He was dashing like a guillotine straight towards her throat, and in that fraction of a second, Reyna was certain she was inevitably doomed. But what was not taken into account happened. Zeke's sword flew high into the air instead of cutting her neck, for a faint blue aura emanated from Reyna's blade, barely catchable by the human eye. It turned out she used a very minuscule and concentrated amount of aura to block his brute attack and disarm him to save her life. She did so, breaking her solemn oath and her pride to never use the aura before her official joining of the academy. Instructor Mark noticed in bewilderment that all the attendees were too slow to realize what happened, because she released the aura at the last defining moment between life and death with terrifying mastery. Zeke stared at her coldly and asked her what she was doing and where her principles had gone. Reyna stood trembling, her features overflowing with intense anger and disgust at herself for breaking her rule to survive. But Zeke did not give her time for regret, so he told her in a deadly tone that the bout did not end with his sword and dashed to attack her again. And he directed a lightning-fast strike with his bare hand that settled directly on her exposed throat. The family's genius immediately fell to her knees, coughing forcefully while threads of blood flowed from her mouth following the precise blow. Leon went crazy in the stands and shouted in protest that this was a noble sword duel and they would not accept the use of these cheap hand-to-hand attacks. The rest joined him in harshly criticizing Zeke, considering it a disgrace and unreasonable for a knight to abandon his sword to resort to a fistfight. But Zeke paid no mind to their empty chatter, for in his own law, winning is the only truth, and he had just won. Reyna began staggering, trying to stand with extreme difficulty, so Zeke looked at her and asked coldly if she wished to continue the bout. She answered with stubborn anger that she had not lost yet, and that he only managed to hit her because she lowered her guard for a moment. Then she realized the gravity and foolishness of her excuse and stopped talking immediately. So she admitted deep down with bitterness that he had been carrying a dagger in his bare hand instead of his fist. She would definitely be a lifeless corpse right now. She swallowed the poison of defeat and set her pride aside to turn towards Instructor Mark and announce in a broken voice, "I have lost. I surrender." Her words fell like a thunderbolt on Owen and the rest, shocked by this impossible reality, for the person they called the scum of humanity just weeks ago had just achieved a sweeping victory against one of the rarest and greatest talents in the history of the famous families. Zeke turned his back, leaving the arena quietly, while the bewildered voice of Mark echoed announcing that the winner is Zeke. Then the scene suddenly shifted away from the academy towards a majestic castle beneath which a city was burning completely in a horrific sight, where knights wearing heavy armor were dealing coldly with a brutal massacre that claimed lives, and throwing dozens of blood-stained corpses into a deep mass grave to bury the traces of their crime. Deep within that dark castle, where the stench of death permeates, a man shouted emotionally, addressing someone sitting quietly named Abil. He asked him indignantly, "How can you sip tea so coldly in a situation like this? That outcast scoundrel Zeke managed to crush the genius Rena." Abil replied to his subordinate William with an indifferent and provocative tone, telling him that he always takes trivial matters far too seriously and annoyingly. He asked him coldly, "How many days remain until the blessing ritual begins?" To which William replied with tense respect, "We have plenty of time until the next full moon, my lord." Abil rose to leave the room, and the camera revealed a horrific scene. Fresh blood completely stained the walls and floor of the office. Then he muttered with a bloody smile, "It seems the time has come to visit the beloved family." William asked him with concern if he intended to go there alone. Abil answered him, his eyes gleaming with a deadly curiosity, that he wanted to see for himself what kind of awakening their interesting younger brother would have. Returning to the cradle, although Zeke's sweeping victory had caused an earthquake that shocked everyone in the facility, the outcast ignored all that commotion and simply went back to lock himself in the training center. Days passed, and after a whole month, the awaited day of the blessing ritual finally dawned. Zeke sighed as he examined his exhausted body, surprisingly admitting to himself that he didn't truly understand how he managed to reach the legendary Red Knight rank with this poor body in his past life. He summoned the system window to appear before him, his eyes smiling with satisfaction when he saw that his skills had leaped noticeably, and one of them had even broken through expectations to reach the expert level. But he noticed with annoyance that the fierce severing skill was still stuck at the beginner level for a reason he didn't know. Zeke explained the system's mechanism to himself. Every time I surpass the expert level, the skill is upgraded to a higher degree and the mastery counter is reset. He had already managed to refine the swift step skill he stole and developed during his last duel. Decker interrupted his solitude, and Zeke asked him coldly what he wanted now. The servant answered with artificial respect that the time of departure was in 2 hours. Zeke ordered him to prepare everything immediately and that he would follow. After the 2 hours passed, Zeke set off in a luxurious horse-drawn carriage accompanied by Decker. The servant muttered, looking out the window, that it had been a very long time since their last visit to the Great Main region. This historical region under Draker's control is located within the majestic Duchy of Troy, and although the family's political headquarters is in the Four Seasons Castle in the heart of the continent, the blessing ritual must be held exclusively here, in the Holy Land where the legend of the first Dragon Slayer was born. The carriage stopped slowly, and as soon as Zeke stepped out, we realized from the majesty of the scene that this legendary place is called Dragon's Nest, the beating heart and spiritual headquarters of the Draker family. Instructor Mark's voice rang out, ordering all trainees to line up and stand with the utmost respect and reverence. Zeke scanned the faces present, muttering that he didn't possess enough awareness to notice this in his past life. For all the spectators who came to attend the ritual are war leaders and nobles with overwhelming influence whose names headline the news. He was certain that his direct family had planted their spies here to watch him, but he mocked in secret. Whatever their intentions are, once they witness my expected failure to awaken today, they will throw me into the corners of oblivion again. But suddenly, his cold looks turned into a raging, fiery anger. He clenched his fist until his knuckles turned white, wondering with deadly malice why that specific scoundrel came here. On the VIP balcony, a noble respectfully asked Abil if he was interested in adopting any of these young trainees. Abil answered with a demonic smile. "No, but I came for a completely different reason. I have a younger brother, and he's very cute standing among them now." This man with a terrifying aura was none other than the second son of the direct lineage of the Draker family, nicknamed Lion's Blade, Abil Draker. His deadly gaze from above met Zeke's malicious eyes from below, prompting the latter to say to himself, although they call him the Lion's Blade, the title he truly deserves is the Butcher Knight. Zeke forced himself to look away to regain his composure, rationally realizing that he is too weak to face him now. In his previous life, Abil never bothered to attend his laughable blessing ritual, which made him seriously wonder, did my recent actions change the course of the future so quickly? He looked at the palms of his hands covered in harsh scars from his hellish training and smiled fiercely. If he came intentionally, then this is a golden opportunity to show him a monster he didn't expect. His contemplations were interrupted by Instructor Mark's strict announcement of the start of the holy blessing ritual. He summoned the student Aaron to be the first to step forward to test his destiny. Aaron stepped forward with nervous steps and slowly rolled up his sleeve, then dipped his bare hand into the basin of holy water, pushing it towards a sharp thorn submerged at the bottom. As soon as the thorn pricked his flesh and the crimson blood began to mix with the water, a glowing blue aura exploded from the fountain, so much that it engulfed the dragon statue in its radiance. Features of terror mixed with ecstasy appeared on Aaron's face as he felt that mighty energy, penetrating his pores and flowing like rivers of living fire within his veins, forcing the dormant energy points in his body to expand violently, and creating a whirlpool of aura spinning madly within his spiritual center.
Zeke watched this transformation and explained in his mind, through the blood tax in this ritual, the aura seal is broken for every child bearing Draker blood upon reaching the age of 12 to graduate from the cradle. Compared to normal knights who wait until their 20s to dream of awakening, this privilege is terrifying and extremely fast.